off track talking about FE4 there, but seriously, I think the negative reaction to Fire Emblem Engage is totally unwarranted at this point. And this video may come back to bite me, and I'm totally willing to admit it if I was wrong and if it sucks, but for now I am looking forward to this game. I truly hope it's good and wins over fans in the long run. Swish. Swish. Fire Emblem Engage is fun, and I don't care who knows it. If you ask me what basic ingredients make up a Fire Emblem game cake, I'd probably tell you that you need a medieval fantasy setting, a super tight SRPG gameplay with blue and red tiles on a top-down map, and character-driven storytelling. Pretty much everything else is subject to change, and you probably don't even need the character-driven storytelling necessarily. Maybe you could throw in rock-solid UI design as a necessity, but that's your call, Holmes. If you've played any game in the series previously, you've probably noticed that, generally speaking, each entry diverts from the previous in some way or another. Let's say you haven't played a Fire Emblem game, though. What is the actual core gameplay like? Well, you pick your good guy, drag him to a bad guy, and attack with him. All the while, you're keeping in mind the larger flow of the battle and the map's layout. More granularly, like salt. You're focusing on putting your individual units in advantageous situations, often based on the basic weapon triangle in most Fire Emblems. While the core of moving characters on blue and red tiles strategically stays unchanged, the smaller mechanics and underpinnings beneath that are always being reworked and fiddled with in the series. And Fire Emblem Engage certainly does that. While others in the series may have done the setting or storytelling better or more compellingly, Engage has some of the most enjoyable and accessible gameplay mechanics yet implemented. One of the simple things that changes up interactions in battle is the chain attack system, which allows certain unit types to add in chip damage during attacks if they're nearby. The damage numbers are usually small in these chain attacks, but occasionally they can make the difference between securing a kill or just barely not doing that. There's also the break system, which I'm a big fan of. If you attack with a weapon that trumps another in the weapon triangle, say attacking a sword user with a lance user, there's a chance that you'll break that enemy. This leaves them unable to attack you back for their next fight that turn. And the fun twist is that they can do this to you too, so you're both rewarded for knowing the weapon triangle mechanic and simultaneously punished gnarly style if you don't know it, or if it slips your mind to double check your unit's position. The most heavily marketed mechanic is the various rings representing past Fire Emblem protagonists. It's probably this game's core feature. These rings and their associated paralog side quests are a kind of greatest hits of Fire Emblem. Each ring grants the character to whom it is equipped with various skills and stat boosts loosely based on the associated ring's lord, meaning Sigurd is the best one because big movement. Also hot salvo tip. I don't like that. Hot tip, put this thing on Louis and just enjoy the ride. There's way too many of these skills to get into without this being a 3-hour video, but each ring feels unique for the most part, though some do feel like, I don't know, let's just give them a big numbers attack. There's a whole slew of other associated mechanics branching off these rings. For example, you can summon it's hard to say. For example, you can summon lesser rings from each ring character's respective games, although these are strictly minor stat boosts for the most part. And there's no dialogue or models associated with them. It's just some chill PNG of their original game art. I would have liked to see some models, dialogue, or even just updated art for these, but at the same time, I recognize that a game has to be released eventually. And also, this game struggles enough with running the larger maps, so I imagine if you crammed a few more character models in here, the Switch itself would begin folding in on itself like a collapsing star. Each of these ring mechanics basically means that any sufficiently leveled unit can be made relevant at any time. If you train up a character enough, they can inherit a limited number of skills from rings that they have a high enough bond level with. For example, give Louis Sigurd's Canto skill so he can move after attacking, and then give him like any other ring and just have fun with it. As I mentioned, the rings each have a side quest map associated with them that is an interpretation of a map from that lord's game. I've expressed before how absolutely stoked I am to see some FE4 representation in a modern Fire Emblem that isn't, the mobile game. And seeing a simulacra of an FE4 map is extremely dope. That said, I do wish we had gotten some villain representation. Spoiler incoming, so skip ahead like 10 seconds if you don't want to hear this, but I was a little disappointed with the final boss having a villain ring fake out where the villainous characters were just oddly shaped silhouette blobs with names vaguely evoking who they were. It's another complaint that can, again, be shot down with, well, a game has to come out eventually, and you know, the whole collapsing star thing. I'm more and more looking forward to a Nintendo hardware upgrade. New games running at a wildly inconsistent frame rate are getting more and more frequent and more frustrating. Put on your conspiracy hat with me for a second. Is Big Reggie Nintendo trying to Jedi mind trick us into wanting a new, more powerful system by publishing worse and worse performing first-party games? It makes you think. Anyway, my opinion on the story is probably in with the majority. Kinda rhymes. But while the story itself is nothing to write home about, it's good silly fun that puts the gameplay itself first. Each story beat feels designed essentially as a setup for whatever the map layout and objectives are. I don't mind this at all for a game like this. I think the tone and its setting and dialogue complement this perfectly. I definitely don't anticipate this style of story and script writing to be the standard going forward, so for an anniversary game full of fan service, I think it's just fine. Fire Emblem engages a story about friendship, if you can imagine such a thing. But it's also a story about honoring your history, and in a way not too dissimilar to Fire Emblem Fates, it's also a story about family. I want to stay spoiler-free as possible, just for the sake of it, but you're more than likely not going to be surprised by any of the twists in Engage. The game feeds you subtle and not-so-subtle hints throughout the story that at least kind of justify the, I saw that coming, that will inevitably happen. Although, like I said, even with the little plot hints, you more than likely wouldn't be shocked by most, if not all, of the major plot beats if you've ever consumed a piece of fiction before. That being said, I don't really think the game is meant to be taken too seriously, and I mean that in the chillest way possible. The most chill way possible. I don't know which is correct. This is a game where when a twist happens, you go, oh, what? All fake light in your head, or with someone else if you're playing with someone watching. I say that because Fire Emblem Engage doesn't even take itself seriously, which I think rocks. This game is more out loud corny than a yellow vegetable with a megaphone, and I think it knows it. A little warning, Three Houses discourse is incoming. Engage's immediate predecessor, Fire Emblem Three Houses, was a real turn in Fire Emblem storytelling, in my opinion. At the very least, the two games preceding it felt much more tongue-in-cheek in their writing, while Three Houses felt like something you were meant to really analyze and think about, with its four-path branching story meant to flesh out characters more than just a simple straight-shot narrative. It didn't fully work for me, and I think I prefer the more tongue-in-cheek, somewhat silly approach to character writing as opposed to the more self-serious approach. At least, for now. Balance is key. And I do think there's a middle ground to strike for a more quote-unquote normal Fire Emblem between the self-serious and the more playful. And, for what it's worth, Genealogy of the Holy War is my favorite FE game, and that game certainly takes itself seriously, so maybe it's just the way Three Houses was executed that I didn't love, but this isn't a Three Houses video, so we'll come back to that some other time. I mean, listen, I'm just not that compelled by the characters in Three Houses. I said it. I said it. It is so hard to talk about an anniversary game without talking about the previous games in the series. In the support conversations with Alear and Engage, the colorful anime people of the cast always do their gimmick/personality trait, and then Alear is usually confused or embarrassed for them.
I could show you how to make a rake.
A rake? What would we use that for?
Harvesting taters.
Taters.
To me, if you're gonna do the character gimmick writing, then your protagonist being as confused and confounded as the player is a pretty good way to handle it in support conversations. If I had one complaint with the character writing, it's that they lean a little too heavily on those gimmicks in conversation. But that's a pretty large issue with FE writing since Awakening, and even more so in Fates. Like I said, balance is key. Overall, I do think characters play off each other well, and out of the characters I actually used, they all definitely grew on me a lot as I played. And I recognize that this is a large cast of characters, and I appreciate having a lot of units at my disposal. So with that in mind, it's really hard to ask to have your cake and eat it too when debating between, why aren't these people more fleshed out, and simultaneously still wanting that large cast. And, that being said, you're far from being able to use the full cast of characters on a single playthrough. Maps are on the medium side of things, so you don't really deploy more than 14 units at a time. This probably sounds like a lot, and it's in line with most FE games in my experience, but through the game you eventually recruit, a lot more than 14 characters. And that certainly lends itself to a lot of replayability. And perhaps it's also something that makes more sense on some kind of self-imposed Iron Man maddening run where you'll end up needing to replace a lot of units. But the game gives you 10 rewinds on each map, barring a couple of small exceptions, so you're gonna have a hard time losing units. On my normal classic playthrough, which has unlimited rewinds, I was often frustrated by how many units I liked that quickly fell behind, with the only recourse being the corrupted fights that spawned. It's unfortunately just a limitation in a game like this with a cast this large. You're just gonna have units that fall off hard if you don't pay extra attention or spend a lot of extra time babysitting them. And I will say, after replaying some of the older FE games, this is a pretty common issue, but it felt especially egregious on my first playthrough with this one. If you're not careful and you overcommit to the same small group of units, then it's going to be a pain to have any others be useful. And listen, hey, somebody stop me. I'm going to say it again, and listen, hear me out. But I can't wait for that potential genealogy of the Holy Warrior you make, dude. And I hope they go full bore. I want those enormous, ridiculous maps with a huge army. Give me maps that I have to save and come back to later. I'm sure I'll find something to complain about that, though. I mean, how can an FE4 remake possibly live up to expectations at this point? And go ahead and take a shot every time I bring up a Japanese exclusive Super Famicom game in a review for a Nintendo Switch game released in 2023. Don't actually do that. You'll die. You'll unalive. I don't know. Can I say die? Back on topic, kind of. Engage did accomplish one thing its predecessor Three Houses certainly didn't. It filled me with a deep desire to go back and play older Fire Emblem games again. Playing through Three Houses kind of fatigued me on Fire Emblem. I'm not sure if that's due to how large the game is, how laborious the monastery sections feel, or the actual Fire Emblem War gameplay part, but I was burned out on FE games for some time after Three Houses. Engage, on the other hand, filled me with a deep thirst for the franchise that I've only recently managed to somewhat quench. Within 2 to 3 weeks of finishing Engage, I played through all of Fire Emblem Fate's Conquest, a game which I thought I'd never try after playing Birthright, and I also played through Shadows of Valentia again. I also busted through Sacred Stones, and I started on FE7.
The drums of war are beating. No man can be trusted.
What happened to Dorcas?
I put poison in his mutton.
Build an army. Trust nobody. Fire Emblem. Only on Game Boy Advance. Rated everyone.
But I haven't worked my way through it quite yet. If it weren't for Engage's tight gameplay and likable cast, I doubt I'd be as obsessed with the series as I am right now. It was a nice experience playing through it and remembering why I liked the series so much to begin with. Fire Emblem Engage is a very fun game. If you're a fan of the franchise, you'll likely appreciate a lot of the things this game does. But if you've never played another Fire Emblem before, I would almost suggest trying out another game in the series first. I do believe Engage is perfectly playable and fun for a newcomer, but a lot of choices in gameplay and story will both make more sense and be much more easily appreciated from a veteran player's perspective, especially and namely in the Ring Paralogs. But I'm also an idiot, and I don't know anything. And if you want to play it, then just play it. You'll still have fun, because the game is fun.